This video is the second chapter of the first course. In the
For
first
the
video,
Katia
I
user
did
training
a short
for Katia 3D
introduction
piping
about
design
how to
application.
how to do a pipe routing and how we use the 3D manipulators. In this video, we are going to see more deeply what are the user preferences that are recommended, what is the general UI for the application, and we will have a short introduction about how to create a 3D piping components and ports. So let's start by opening this predefined model. When starting the application the first time, we will be in this predefined configuration. So the system will tell us if there is some predefined setup. So in your case, if you don't have any setup, this will be empty. So we just close this panel. And we can also close the application option panel, which is not useful in our case. This panel is important, it's a data information panel, and we can dock it inside the right side of the window. This data information panel gives us some information about the context, so meaning which kind of line I would like to use for the routing, and also some information about a selected object. So if I select object, I have different information on it, and some of them can be directly edited to modify the informations. Inside the user interface, we can see also this selection option balloon. In piping, we are mostly using this part selection mode, which is a kind of equivalent of a product selection from the global Katia user interface, and that allows to select a product and to see information on this product. So you can select the product, you can select a port if it's an equipment with piping information, and on this port you can see the different information of this port one by one by selecting them like that. On the bottom side, we have the global toolbar, action bar, in which we have the main command of the piping discipline. Most of the commands are inside the free design toolbar, and we can have access directly here. For a better usage, we have two commands, the part mode and the manipulate mode, that we are often switching from one to the other one. So it could be useful to have them separately in the action bar instead of having through this drop-down list. So to customize your toolbar, you can directly access to the command for customization of the toolbar. And then we can modify the 3D section by adding a command. So in our case, I'm going to add the command part mode. So I'm going to search for this command. So part mode, this one. And I'm going to add another command, which is manipulate. So manipulate mode. Okay. So I can close this panel, and then I can reorganize the different icon. To do that, you use customization mode and you drag and drop the command where you want to have them accessible. And when it's done, you just exit from the customize mode. So now I have directly access to these two commands that were behind this icon previously. So before starting any new pipe, what we are going to see is what are the default preferences that needs to be defined for this training. So to do that, we just go to preferences. We go to the apps, 3D modeling, 3D piping and tubing 3D design, and general. Those are the default options when you install the application. And in our case, we are going to select this one and this one. So the recommended option that usually we are using are those one. After, depending on the context, you could decide to deactivate some or activate other. For example, in a piping context, this one is not really required. We don't need to have starting straight lines. This option is much more used for small tubes like hydraulic tubes, things like that, which needs to be bended on the machine. So to start, we are going to deactivate this one. Setting to allow multiple route on port. This one, it's more used in the preliminary phase when we want to have to route different iteration for a pipe, and you would like to connect to the same equipment port two different pipes just to create them and to compare them together. So this is why we have activated this one. The other are used more if you have a setup installed. In our case, we are going to start this training without any setup. So they are activated, but it will not be really used by the system. Let's now have a quick look about how to create an equipment or a piping component with piping ports. So we are going to create for an equipment, for example, a new 3D part. And on this 3D part, you can create the geometry you want. So for example, using the part design essential application. So here we just are going to create a simple box to represent the equipment. Once the geometry is defined, you can switch back to the tubing and piping part design application, this one. And if it's an equipment, you can set the part as an equipment. So here we add a kind of extension to specify that this generic part is in fact an equipment. You can select the equipment customized type that is provided out of the box, and then you can key the part subtype that you want. In my case, I have created a discrete list inside the data setup, so I can select along different disciplines, and inside each discipline I can select some types. So if you don't have anything set up inside the data setup, those fields will be completely empty, and you can read the string that you want. I will come back later on data setup and how to define a discrete list for standard attributes in another course. You see that the icon has changed, and now you can create ports. So to create a port, you select the port management icon and you click add. To add a port is defining by four information. So the point, the anchor point, the alignment and the orientation, and the name. The name is important because if you replace one equipment by another one, and this equipment is connected to a pipe, the system will do the mapping based on the publication name. Meaning that if I replace equipment 1 by equipment 2, the pipe which is connected to port 1 will automatically rerouted to the new equipment with the same port name. So we are going to create a point on the fly here, for example at this location, with an alignment direction and with an orientation if we want. The system is creating inside the tree an axis system and a publication. At any moment you can modify these coordinates here if you want to change the position of the port. So to have access to the list of the port, you click again to the icon and you can add another port on the top if you want. So you have different mode of creation of point. Okay. So this is the first way to create an equipment, very simple. You create a geometry and you add the port. When the port has been created, you can specify some attributes value if you want. It's not mandatory, but it will help to trigger and to filter and to assist the design when you are going to route something from this port or to connect a part on this port. So by selecting the port using the port attribute command, you have access to the main attribute of the port, and you can set the value manually by keying the value you want, or again, if the data inside your setup, you have defined some list of discrete value for the standard attribute, you will have access to those value of discrete attributes. Nominal size, whatever. So in the case of we don't have any setup, you can enter the value that you want or just leave it empty. Okay, let's say unstyle. Apply. Okay. So now if I go back to the product and I select a part selection and I select my product, so I see the port information inside the data information panel with the different information that I have set on it. So this is a way of creating an equipment. So I can save this one. To create a piping part is a little different. You must first select what is the family of the part that you would like to create, meaning it's one of those predefined type of family that are already configured inside the system. So is the part that you want to create is a cap, a coupling, and so on. Let's assume it's a valve, so I'm selecting a piping valve. And then in the same way, I can create the geometry of this valve very quickly for this example, but it could be a more complex shape. Also, we will see that we can import a step file. Okay, so in the same way that for the equipments, so you can, to specify the parameter of the part, you must go to the piping part design application. And then you can specify what is the type of the part, like we did for the equipment. We said it's a pump. Here is the same. Which type of valve is it? So either you key the value you want, or if you have preset a list of possible subtype value, you can select the one you want. And in the same way, at the level of the part, you can specify also which standard is it and what is the default size for the part. If you don't define this information will come from the port information. So if I don't specify nominal size, then this value on the part will be computed according to the value of the ports. So if I select the part, I see for the moment it's an NC and ball valve part. Now I'm going to add a port on it, like in the previous example. So for the port definition, there is different kind of type of port. We usually use the part port, but there is, for example, the all port if the pipe is supposed to cross the port. So usually it is used for supports, for example. All these different type of ports are well described inside the documentation. So we are going to create one point here with this and this orientation, for example. Orientation. Okay. Port 1 and another one. What is important when creating a component is to always respect the same convention. And we also have a document that explains the best practice to to follow for the design convention of a piping component. So I have created 2 ports, and inside the attribute management, you can see that the standard is inherited from the value defined on the part, and for the nominal size, I can modify the value. For example, let's say 4 inch, and the end style, let's say 12. The rating, we can leave it empty. If there is a flow direction that you would like to force on the port, you can also predefine the flow, for example, for check valves. You can apply this information on port 1, and you can have it by default also apply on port 2. What does it mean? It means that now you can see that on the part, the attributes are evaluated, computed based on the port. If on port 2 the size is different than for port 1, let's assume the port 2 the size is 3 inch, then you will see that the computed value on the part will be a 4 inch cross 3 inch. So we have created our 2 parts, and those parts can be now used for placement on a pipe or to start routing from it. Another method, if you would like to import step file, it's possible also. So you can create import, specify it's a step file, and you can search for a step file on your drive. Okay, and for this, as it's an equipment here, we can precise that this element is now, we would like to add the equipment extension on top of it to specialize this part. And here it's a heat exchanger, let's say shell tube. Okay. So you can see that the object has a subtype attribute value heat exchanger shell tube. It's an equipment, and on top of it now I can add the different ports, or the port information, like I did previously. So create point from circle. Okay. Orientation and the direction, for example this one, if we consider that this is the direction, or this one. Port 1, and we can do the same for the other. So it's very simple and very quick to add this kind of information. So I don't create for the others. When you have created this, you can hide the axis system, they are useless. And you can go back to the part itself, and you can visualize the 2 new ports. So this part can be reused in our model. When we start learning the basic functionality of piping and tubing 3D design application, we can see that we can work without putting in place any setup, predefined setup. But we will quickly see that if we would like to take benefit of all the capability and all the power of the application, it will be needed to put in place this setup. When we talk about setup, piping setup, it means putting in place the standardization of the attribute value, the definition of the design rules, and the piping specification, meaning the list of available parts that can be used in a given context. On encourage you to have a look to a dedicated video that is talking about piping and tubing setup and administration, and in which we come back to all these concepts, how we start creating those tables, how we set up inside the system, and how they are used and when they are used by the application.